Hi, and welcome to Art with Mrs. Cat. In this session, we're going to be doing our very own O'Keeffe Desert. We're going to be looking at Pedernal, which is a work of art by Georgia O'Keeffe from 1941, 1942. And we're going to be creating our own version of that based on what O'Keeffe created. Of this mountain that she kind of became obsessed with in her art. And so we're going to be looking at that, and we're going to be creating our own, looking at, creating these various, hues and tints of different colors and so forth, and kind of layering things in the way she did as well. So let's go ahead and get started. What you're going to need for this project, you're going to need obviously paper or watercolor paper, whatever you have on hand. You're going to need some type of paper to paint on. Obviously, it doesn't need to be like printer paper because, as we've talked about before many times, it's too thin. And when you're using like a wet medium like watercolor or paint, it will curl up really bad. So this will still curl up more so than like traditional watercolor paper, but it is a mixed media paper, so it's a little bit thicker than regular paper. I would say it's more like the thickness of cardstock. So it'll be a little bit more manageable, but it's still going to be, kind of wavy. But that's okay. All right, so just keep that in mind. Obviously, as always, you're going to need some water and some brushes in various sizes and your watercolors. So again, you can use watercolors that come in this form. Okay, so like in a tube. You can use those types of watercolors, or you can use like your pan watercolors. Okay, so go ahead and get started and move into creating our mountain. Okay, so when we are talking specifically about this work of art that we're going to be working with, I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. So just so you have an idea of the work that we're looking at for inspiration for this project, you can see that right over here. It's Mount Pedernal. And so this is kind of that example work that we're looking at. So we're going to be starting with blue tones and tints for that background, for the sky, the mountain. They're going to kind of be our blues. And then we'll move into like yellows and greens and reds. So there's going to be very little red, and that's going to be like, kind of like that pop of color. So let's go ahead and start with our blues. All right, for my sky blue, I actually added, I don't know if you kind of see that here. Try and pull it up so you can see it there. I added just a tiny amount of red to it, just to kind of neutralize it a little bit. Just to slightly kind of neutralize it some. Obviously, blue and red are not complementary colors, so normally you would like add a complement to the color. But if you notice in this work of art, the blue actually has a little bit of a purplish tone to it, or tint to it. And so I added just a touch of red to kind of give it a little bit of that undertone. But as you can see, it's not purple. It's still blue, but it's kind of become, and I added a little bit of black to it too, just to kind of give it that grayish blue color. So that's going to be my sky color. And then I've got my more vivid blue here. I'll add some more colors to that, probably a little bit of red as well, just to kind of make it be on the same family as my sky color. But of course, the sky color is not going to go on a lot of the background, as I'm going to leave some of it open and white. Okay, so with that, I am going to take a brush, and I'm just going to like lay in some water. So I'm going to lay in some water for my clouds. As you can see, I'm approaching this a little different than I have like some of our other painting projects. One, I'm using a different type of paper. And I want this to be able to kind of dry quickly. So I want to do it a little bit faster than like when we did our Hudson River School. So as you see, I'm not just like painting color straight across, which is kind of a common method that we pick up when we learn art, like in, elementary school and that kind of thing, is we just want to like just paint a wash of color. But what gives it that sense of realism, that sense of depth, all of those things is how we lay that color down on the paper. So as you can see, like I'm just like leaving like puddles in some areas. I mean, basically that's what they are. They're puddles that I'm leaving in some areas. I'm swooping up in other areas. I'm leaving some areas white. I laid some water down in those areas so that they'd stay white, and then the color would kind of bleed into the edges of them. Other areas I'm, creating like texture so that it kind of has that like, that sky cloudy kind of a look without actually like painting like, an elementary school style cloud or something. So I'm just kind of adding like some kind of wispy texture as well. And don't be afraid to like let the water work for you. We've talked about this with some of our other tutorials and our other demos. Like just kind of let that water work for you. And it will. You'll let it. And it can give you some very, very effective techniques and textures and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of water there in the bottom area here, just to get some different looks going on down there. Okay, so when I'm happy with what I've laid in for my sky, I'm going to have to let it dry for a little bit, and then I'll go in and I'll do my mountain. So in the interim, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix my colors together for my mountain, and then wait for this area to dry so that I can do my mountain and it not bleed into my sky. Alright, so with my mountain, I am going to add a few little like orangey red sections. I'm going to go ahead and kind of lay those in a little bit, and then I'll work around them. Okay, so now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add my blue. So I went and kind of created this darker blue. I did add some red to it. As my layers start drying, I'm going back in and I'm adding some of these darker values, just to kind of create that depth and that dimension on my mountain. Now, if I want to wash this out some, I've already kind of got that washed out look, but if I feel like I need to do it a little bit more, I can add some water to my brush, and then I can just kind of go in here And just kind of wiggle my brush around with that water in there. Alright, so as you can see, I've kind of washed out this bottom here. It's still drying in a few places. But now I've set it up and I'm ready for, once this dries, I'm going to be able to add in my yellows, browns, and reds and greens to kind of create this foreground that will, give us that kind of desert floor look. So the last color I'm going to use is red. I'm going to do my yellow, green, brown tones, and then red will kind of be like that finishing touch to get those little highlights in the foreground. So first thing I'm going to do is kind of create like a yellowish brown kind of a wash that kind of looks like sand almost. That'll be like the ground. I'll kind of add that in a few places. Then I'll go in with my green to kind of add some of those backgrounds, like greeneries and stuff that are in the background. And then I'll start adding in the foreground, those like little red hills that you see a little bit of, those yellow and green, bushes and stuff. And then the red will be kind of that finishing touch. So then what I'm going to go do is I'm going to kind of weave those colors in. All right. You see, I kind of left this open because I know I'm going to be going in with the green and the yellow in there. And so I don't want to saturate it with color where then it just kind of becomes muddy. So I kind of left that open intentionally. I did do like a light wash there, but it's mostly white. All right, and then I'm just going to use that dark color to kind of pull up right there because I'm going to have these like red hills that go up right here in the corner. So I'll just add a little bit of dark underlayer there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do these little hills right here so that I can do my green kind of on top of them. So let's pick up and use a smaller brush to do those details. All right, so it's going to be kind of the same color that I did in the mountains right here. I'm going to pick that color up with a little bit more of the brighter orange color. Okay. And then I'm just going to go in here. I'm going to create that little wash right there of those little red hills. And you notice I'm leaving some spots open so I can go in with that green, kind of like you see there. So I am leaving a few of the spots open. And we'll go and do the same thing on the other side. Again, leaving some of those white spots. Okay, now if we look closely, there is a little bit of red kind of in this kind of red in the background, just a little bit. So I'm going to add a few little dots there. Sure. So I'm just going to add just a little peek of that color kind of on those edges there. Okay, so some of that will be covered up, but where it peeks through, we'll get that effect. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is work on my greens and my yellows. I'm going to have some of those darker greens kind of in the back, kind of dotting the background. And then I'll have some brighter yellowy greens in the foreground mixed with the yellow, mixed with red, okay? So for that background, I'm going to take kind of a bit of a sage color, kind of an olive drab shade sage color. And then I'm going to mix it with a deeper green color here. Okay, so that kind of gives me that like earthy tone there. Okay. Then it's a little too bright for my taste, so I'm going to actually add a little bit of brown to it. Kind of a reddish brown, so red kind of helps, red in it, and helps neutralize the green. There we go, that's more like it. Okay, there we go, now we're talking. Alright, so I'm going to use these to just kind of dot this background a little bit, okay? You see, I am just doing like little dots in the background. All right, so when I'm happy with those little dots in the background, I'm going to move into this area. So I'm going to use some of that same color, and then I'll brighten up some of my other greens. So I'm going to use some of that same color kind of in the background back here. Alright, so I'm just kind of going in and adding some of those lighter values of green there, kind of fading it, and then I'll go in and add the yellow. So I'm going to do my yellow next. And as you can see, I'm overlapping the green in some areas, and it just kind of gives it that depth and that dimension. So I'm just dropping some water in there because what will happen is it'll kind of wash out the color a little bit as it dries, which can give some really cool like little techniques. Okay, so now I'm going to go in with some more green, kind of get some of these outer edges done, and then we'll add those red highlights in. Alright, so now that I've done my greens and my yellows, the last little touch I'm going to do is some really bright pops of red in my, foreground. So I'll add those little pops of red, and then this one will be done. So I'm actually just going to use like a very vivid red. I'm going to mix it with a red orange because I want to tone it down just a little bit. So now it kind of produces that earthy kind of a red. So I've got the true red mixed with that red orange. I'm using a smaller brush. You can just use any kind of brush that you're comfortable with for this. But I kind of wanted to use this smaller brush to have a little bit more control about how I place my red in here. You can see I'm just kind of dotting it in there, kind of going around the green some. course, remember red's kind of like an accent in this. We're not covering the whole thing with red. We're just putting in some of those red highlights and accents. And as it dries, I'm just going back over some of the red spots to add some darker values just to give it that depth so it doesn't completely wash out. Alright, so you'll let that dry. If when it dries you feel like you may need to go in and add some more, like, you know, green or something like that to kind of add some more of that depth, that's perfectly fine. I might go in and do the same thing after this dries, but for the most part this project is finished. So that's basically how you do this O'Keeffe Desert project. You're looking at this work of art that we discussed, and you're looking at that and you're kind of mimicking O'Keeffe's desert. So you're going to look at those different values, tints, shades, all of those things that you're working together and creating this work of art with. I will see you next time on Art with Mrs. Kapp. Bye.